Yeah, I just moved to the New Jersey side.
You made it to the dark side of the force?
Yeah, well, I was in my little place for 17 years,
Yeah.
and it was enough. And you know, West New York is kind of cool because we live on 67th Street in West
yeah.
New York, and the streets are numbered the same way as in Manhattan. So we
Yeah.
look right out.
Oh, cool.
Across the river.
Almost the same trajectory.
Right
That's
there,
cool.
yeah.
All right, let me. Vince, let me hear you.
We're here at Jazz Live San Diego with Joshua Breakstone. All right.
Vince, if you can, sneak in the usual, jazz education questions. I'm going to get an idea, too, from him going back to the drive, but,
Right.
music's important for kids and those types of things.
Yeah, I had something here about
We have our
this.
membership campaign starting in a few days, and we always love to grab sound bites from established musicians like yourself to talk about how, I mean, it's obvious, but how important music is and music education for kids and things like that. So it'll be better maybe in the conversational tone of an interview where I can grab the sound bites.
We'll see how it works.
Okay. All right, I'm rolling when you're ready. When you want.
You ready?
Sure.
Excellent. Okay, great. We're here at Jazz Live San Diego with Joshua Breakstone. Welcome to San Diego and to Jazz Live.
Thanks, Vince. I'm so glad to be here.
So let's start with the band that you've got playing with you tonight. Some great musicians in your trio. Tell us about them.
Well, I'm going to start with the gentleman who I go way back with, and that's Roy McCurdy, who's playing drums. And I mean, Roy, man, when Roy comes on a gig, when he comes to play, he comes to play. And that's what I love about Roy. He's an exciting musician, and even beyond that, there's a lot of great drummers, and that's fine, and Roy is one. But I'll tell you what, Roy is a great musician, and I respect his playing so much. It's just a wonderful experience every time I get a chance to get over to the West Coast and to play with him. And also on the bass, we have Marshall Hawkins, and this is going to be a great pleasure. This is the first time we've had the opportunity to play together. So wonderful rhythm section from California.
So you say that you've played with Roy McCurdy for a few years. This is not the first time. Can you expand a little bit on when you first met him?
God, I go back to the old days. There was a club in L.A. which was called Dante's, and they had a guitar night. Maybe it was a Monday night or Sunday night or Monday night, and every guitar player in town would show up for that guitar night. And that's when I met Roy. We started doing a few of those together. That was way back. And at that time I was recording for Contemporary Records, which is up in Berkeley, up in the Bay Area. And I was spending a lot of time in California. I was playing more northern, more San Francisco and Bay Area, but getting down to LA every so often, and going up to Portland, going up to Seattle. And that's where I first met Roy, even though we ended up doing a lot of those Dante's guitar nights with Tonight Show band members. So, but that's when I first had the opportunity to play with Roy, and then many subsequent times when I've gone through LA, we've gotten together.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your latest release, your latest recording, With the Wind and the Rain. It's a new recording with a standard guitar, bass, drums trio, but you're augmented with a cello on some of the tunes, which is a dedication to a Japanese influence on you. Can you tell us a little bit about Mitsuru Nishiyama?
Yep, hey, that was very good.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, we call him Nishiyama, or Nishi, but you're right, his name is Nishiyama Mitsuru. And my very first trip to Japan, I went over not to play, but as I mentioned, I was recording for Contemporary Records, and Victor JVC bought the rights to one of the recordings and had me go over for promotional work, meeting people and shaking hands and doing a few little interviews here and there. And I had never particularly wanted to go to Japan or had any kind of dream of going over there, and so it was a great treat to go someplace new and unexpected. And I met somebody when I was in Kyoto, an American, and he told me that there was a great club in Osaka, and how about we go over to this club one night together? So I said, sure, why not? And we went over to a club that was called the Sub Club, and that was Nishiyama's club. Nishiyama-san was a bassist, and it was one of those things, Vince, you know these things where he asked me to play. He had a guitar in the place. I didn't bring my guitar. And in maybe 3 minutes, we knew we were going to be friends forever. It just was so good right from the beginning. And we played for, I'd say, not more than about 15 or 20 minutes. And he said, man, I didn't know he was a producer. He said, man, I want to bring you up for a tour. Can you come? I want you to come to Japan in 6 months, man. We play together. And that was the start of me and Japan. But he was a producer. He must have brought me over to Japan 25 or 30 times. And I began working with some other people after many years with Nishi. And then I went back and was working with Nishiyama-san just a few years ago. And that was a real pleasure to play with him again. But he had gotten quite a bit older, and he had moved from playing the bass to playing the cello. It was much easier to get around, much easier to get around on the instrument, as a matter of fact. And we did a tour. Actually, we did two, but the first tour that we did, you know, I conceived of that group as being like a guitar trio. Being a guitarist, I'm very much accustomed to that format. And but I was conceiving of the group as a guitar trio, plus adding another solo instrument, like you'd add a trumpet or you'd add a saxophone or whatever. And I thought that was great because I always loved the sound of the cello, and I thought that was a beautiful instrument. So I thought that would be a nice thing. It was only after I'd say 3 or 4 nights that I started conceiving of that group in a different way. Rather than a guitar trio plus a cello, I started hearing that group as a string section. So it was the strings of the cello, the strings of the guitar, the strings of the bass with percussion accompaniment. And that's when that group really became exciting and interesting to me. And we did that, used that format on 2 tours in Japan. And Nishiyama passed away, and I'd had that in mind for years and years, that group, and decided to go for it. And I came back to New York. You know, it was kind of surprising to me, because back in the day, bassists were really eager to have a chance to step out in front of the group and play cello. And when you start thinking of all of the great bassists, just to name a few, I mean, off the top, we're talking about people like Red Mitchell and Sam Jones, and of course Harry Babson. That's maybe a different kind of case. Lots of guys came out and played cello, and it was their chance to get out in front of a group. You know, when the bass plays his solos, everybody drops out, and he's kind of playing in a vacuum. There's nobody swinging. There's no bass behind him swinging and playing that time. So when I discussed the whole question of playing cello as opposed to playing bass with our cellist, Mike Richmond, who's a very well-known bassist in and of himself, he said, "Boy, it's like taking a trip right to heaven, having that swing behind you and having a chance to play with the group behind you. It's wonderful." So that's a little bit about Nishiyama and kind of the gift he gave me by coming and playing the cello that first of those 2 tours in Japan.
So then you worked mostly originals on this, almost exclusively originals on the new release. And so then did you have to try to find some new ways to arrange those for this this quartet, this group of four instruments, or this string section, as you like to call it? How was that process for you?
Well, I mean, when you say originals, many of those songs are actually compositions by great bassists. So, as far as original compositions, my original
Right.
compositions go, I'm not sure if there are any
No.
on the recording.
No, and did I say originals? I meant standards, actually. But
Standards, yeah.
You have quite a few of the jazz standard repertoire in there. Excuse me.
Right. So, yeah, well, when it comes to standards, I mean, we try and do something with a tune. You know, this is when we step back from everything we're doing with all the technique and the instruments and the recordings and everything. You know, what we're trying to do is communicate with music and use this kind of nonverbal means of communication to say something. So it's kind of the same thing when we consider the tunes that we play. Like, repertoire is very, very important. That's why I would say to young musicians who may be listening out there that, you know, it's a wonderful resource to have something like the Real Book and all of these books that are available now that I didn't really have access to when I was coming up. But don't really confine yourself to just that. We all have kind of almost a responsibility as musicians to pick repertoire, to play things that are important to us, and then communicate to an audience why we think that song is interesting, why we think that song is beautiful, important, why that song is sentimental, why it makes us cry, why it breaks our heart, whatever it's going to be. So, you know, as far as picking the songs for the recording, I mean, yes, we did play a few things that I just was sort of in love with at the moment. But then again, we do have, as I began mentioning, some compositions that were by some of the great bassists, from Oscar Pettiford to who else did we do? Well, there's a few things. Sam Jones, we did Sam Jones too, and we wanted to pay a little bit of tribute, since we actually, you know, yes, it's a bass and a cello in there, but those are two great bassists as well. So,
well, I wanted to just touch on jazz education a little bit. Jazz 88 is an institution that not only plays and promotes jazz music, but also education of young artists, young students, and older people who are enthusiasts and listening. Education has had a big role in your life. You've had bachelor's in jazz studies, done master's studies. What is the role, do you think, of jazz education for continuing the art form and pushing it forward?
well, it's the most important thing we can be doing. I mean, if we don't have people who are interested, who understand the music, who care about the music, who love the music, then, you know, you hear all these prognostications about, oh, is jazz going to survive? Is jazz dying? All this kind of stuff. Well, I mean, the music, of course, will always change over time. But, you know, jazz education for the music itself is one question, for the survival of the music and for the growth of the music. Of course, that's essential. There's also just the question of jazz as a segment of music education, and music education, or even arts education, is just so vitally important in the world we live in. You know, it puts people in touch with their emotions. It gives people, individuals, outlets for those emotions. It teaches people how to play together, how to communicate, how to have respect for each other. It's such a wide range, and as you mentioned, you know, I've been involved in music education, and I have a book that's being used at universities all over the country and internationally. And I will mention that I was just contacted by Downbeat a few weeks ago, and I'm actually writing a piece on education, which will appear in the January issue of Downbeat, on the connection between the voice and the things that we play. But I'm glad you brought up that whole topic because, you know, in a nutshell, education, jazz education for any age, really, kids definitely, but for people who are interested of any age, is really, really a very essential idea for music.
Well, let's just touch on the future and where things are going past this. You're on a West Coast swing doing some dates here. What do you got going on next? You just mentioned your Downbeat article. What in music are you reaching for, or what things do you have planned?
Well, about a week after I get home, I've got a little concert back home when I get there, and then about a week after that I'm leaving for Japan for about a 3.5-week tour, and that's going to be a really interesting tour because I've got a few promoters put together my tours in Japan, but I've got 2 new promoters, and so that means I'm going to be going to a lot of new places and seeing some new things, and I'm really looking forward to that. We recorded a new cello quartet record, it sounds almost crazy. It's been kind of busy, but it sounds crazy for me to even say, but just about 2 weeks ago. And that is scheduled to be released next spring. I think they're talking about May. And we're putting together a tour for May. I think that one's going to be mostly from New York and about every place you can imagine, from there out to maybe Chicago and back, all through Pennsylvania and Ohio, and you know, all that. So you know, that's kind of what's on the horizon.
Excellent. Where can folks find out more about you and get connected with you online? Do you do that?
Sure. Well, they can find me on Facebook. They can find me on my website, which is the most common sense thing you ever heard in your life, www.joshuabreakstone.com. And also, you know, my record company, which I'm very proud to say, Capri Records. I believe the last release was my 6th with them. They're making available copies of my recordings to anybody who either listens to the broadcast tonight or has attended for no shipping fee. Shipping will be free, and that's jazzrecordrevival.com. I don't know why it's not caprirecords.com, but they're using this other jazzrecordrevival.com. So if anybody's interested, they can take a look at all the recordings I've done for Capri, and they can also order and get something shipped. You have to put in a little note saying that you were listening tonight, that you're listening to KSDS, and then you get the free shipping and all that.
Well, that's excellent. Well, Joshua, we really are very honored to have you here. Congratulations on the release and on the tour, and all the best of luck with the things that you've got going on.
Thanks, Vince. It's great to be here.
Awesome, thank you. Joshua, there's 2 things to read.